Hi, I'm Simon. I do creative view and Nuxt work from Orlando, Florida. And I have a quick story to tell you. Basically, I was asked to create one of these Mighty Bytes videos and ended up sort of getting nerd sniped by a weird solution into actually creating a Nuxt module. So I was working on a website and I had this challenge with sort of mounting a component that I was having a hard time overcoming. Figured out how I could do it with a potential solution. But that solution felt so backwards that I could swear it was an anti-pattern in Vue. It's something that I've never seen before. I went as far as getting on a call with Daniel Rowe to see if he could just sanity check my approach and make sure that what I was about to tell you isn't completely wrong. So let's take a look. Now imagine you have a component in your application that has to appear on multiple pages. Let's pretend it's a heavy component, right? It's got to load a bunch of textures, or it's got to load a 3D model, or it's got to connect to a socket server. It's something that you want to mount as few times as possible, right? You want to persist it as much as you can to avoid the expense of recreating it in the user's browser. Here's the issue. Even if you have two components, one component on two places that is identical, you pass in the same props, you give it a key, you wrap it in Keep Alive, whatever you can do to get that component to stay, to not recreate when it's moving just between two pages but existing in both, it will still get unmounted and remounted between the two. So what is the typical approach to solving an issue like this? Well, from what I've seen, is to take the component and to move it above the page structure. Is to put it into a layout or to put it directly into app.vue if you're working on perhaps a small project. And this method works well, and it's sort of the recommended way of doing persisted headers and footers is, right, you have a layout and you have a header, and then you just have Nuxt page below that. Now this works, but it has one caveat that's going to affect us here. The component is going to be outside of the page. It's going to be above the page or below the page, but it's not a part of the page's DOM. What if you want the best of both worlds? You want to avoid a component remounting more than it needs to, and you want to keep it as a part of the page DOM. That's when it hit me that we could use the teleport component for this purpose. Now, typically when you think teleport, you think you're taking a lower level child component somewhere down the component tree, and you're elevating its DOM to the top of the DOM tree. So modal pop-ups is a great example of this, right? You have a child component, you click a button and a modal pop-up fills either the body tag or the SSR safe teleports tag if you're using that. But what if we flip this notion on its head and we take a higher level component somewhere near the top of our component tree outside of Nuxt page? We wrap it in a teleport and we push its DOM down into the page. And all we have to do for that to work is use a selector ID inside of our page or inside multiple pages, and the teleport will be able to find the page's content. So this approach actually works, but it does get a little bit tricky. So when the route changes, the teleport component won't know that it changes, and it will just drop the component, which will cause our component to vanish. So to make the teleport reactive to page changes, we have to watch the page change and do this quick little shuffle on our teleport's to target, forcing it to reset. But as Daniel pointed out when we spoke, it gets a little bit trickier with asynchronous components, with suspense and await and all that, where it might not be available in the next tick. And so you have to use a mutation observer or something like that to keep tabs on the target's presence on the page so that you know when that page is actually loaded and when that target is available on the next page. So I know I've gone very quickly through this quick tip. I've gone ahead and put this together as a Nuxt module so that you guys don't have to really keep pace with this. You can check out the code on your own time. You can find it. It's Nuxt Adaptive Teleport. It adds an adaptive teleport component into your project, and it works just as described. Just keep it outside of the Nuxt page, put whatever content you need to in there, whatever components you need to keep mounted, and those page changes won't impact it. You'll be able to keep your components within the page DOM and mounted the entire time. You can find this on GitHub, and you can install it in your project with just one Nuxy command, so go ahead and give that a shot. And I will be the first to admit this still kind of feels hacky. So if you have any suggestions, any recommendations, a better way of doing this, or just want to improve my code, I would welcome the feedback. So I hope this, at a bare minimum, was intriguing, and I hope it got you thinking a little bit outside the box, because it looks like we can always teleport back into it. Thank you guys for watching. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome back from break. And before we hear from Philip, let's take a look again at CK Editor. CK Editor is a fully customizable, collaborative, rich text editor that integrates smoothly with popular frameworks like Vue, React, and Angular. Designed to enhance content creation, it provides an exceptional experience for editing documents, web pages, and diverse content types, all with a single intuitive environment. With over 100 plugins, CK Editor 5 adapts to any workflow, so you can build exactly what your content creation process needs. Despite its extensive flexibility, CK Editor remains straightforward to configure and set up using Builder. Yay, CK Editor! All right, and up next we have Philip Rakolski, the co-founder and CDXO, Chief Developer Experience Officer at Alokai. Philip will talk to us about efficient multi-site setup with Nuxt layers. In this session, make sure to stay tuned and gain the valuable insights. Welcome to the stage, Philip.
Hello everyone. It's good to maybe. Oh, why is it actually showing the browser stuff? Anyway, I guess you will have to live with it, or maybe not. Okay, let's not bother with this. So it's good to see you all. It's been a while since the last Next Nation. And you may know me from talking all the time about performance. So this time I will be actually talking about something else. I think maybe for the second time in my career, I found a topic that is a little bit different, but it correlates a little bit with the articles I was writing on Vue School. So if you read my articles in the past, you probably will find it a little bit familiar. Before that, to those who don't know me, so I was introduced. I'm Filip Rakowski. I'm a co-founder and CTO and also CDXO, Chief Developer Experience Officer at Alokai. I'm also a member of Technology Council of Maha Alliance, which is a lobby organization that is focusing on bringing the API first technologies to the front of the e-commerce world, and not only e-commerce actually. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm not sure how many people are here already on Blue Sky. It's kind of like a new cool thing to be at, but frankly speaking, like it's 10 times better than X. It's much less bloated. There are very good discussions. It feels a little bit like Twitter was, I don't know, like 5, 6 years ago. But I'm also on X, and I'm still watching it. I'm still responding there. A lot of my friends hasn't moved, so you can find me on both social media. And now, what today's talk is about. So, today's talk is about the problem that many companies face, sometimes in the exact, sometimes in the different flavors. And I think when you'll be watching this, a lot of you can actually relate with at least part of the problem. And I hope you will be able to learn something useful, something valuable that you will be able to apply to the project that you work on. Because it's basically a problem of reusability, and we all work a lot around this problem. It's the way how we optimize our applications, it's the way how we make the setups more efficient, the updates faster, the cost lower, etc. And it is based on my own experiences, and the solution to the problem I'll be outlining is kind of proven in battle, so you can trust me that it actually works. And in short, we'll be talking about the multi-site efficiency problem. And it may sound exotic, but actually it's not that exotic. So in short, we'll be discussing how to efficiently develop multiple applications with some kind of common foundations, like a common part. In other words, we'll be talking how to turn something like this, where we have a common part repeated 3 times, basically, into this. And it is a problem that many companies, many projects face in different flavors. For example, the example that I will be describing is very much rooted in the e-commerce industry and use cases when we have just multiple e-commerce applications. And frankly, e-commerce applications are extremely similar to each other. Like I would say probably 70% of the functionalities are exactly the same. They're only differing on some slight UI changes. I mean, you're probably shopping online. Like all of the e-commerce websites, they're looking exactly the same. They're having all the baseline functionalities exactly the same. So it's a nice exercise to figure out if actually all of that can be extracted into the same core on the front end and then slightly changed. So that's something we'll be trying to do right now. Very often companies outside of e-commerce face similar issues with multiple touch points, so multiple entry points for the user, like applications for web, a kiosk, mobile applications, maybe some portals for different kinds of customers, like a B2B customer, a B2C customer. I've seen a lot of things like that, really. And again, this is based on my own experiences, and the solution to the problem I will be outlining is kind of rooted in e-commerce, but I think it is applicable to a lot of different kinds of products. But before I will dig there, and before I will explain further, let me outline the context a little bit so we can better understand the problem. So I will start with explaining what we do at Allokai in the least salesy way possible. So in short, Allokai is a platform that helps building storefronts within the composable architecture. And you may be asking, what the hell is composable architecture? And I think the best way to think about this is like a well-tailored suit. So composable architecture is an architecture paradigm where instead of using a single backend platform to cover basically everything like that you need, like Shopify, you're actually composing, hence the name, your backend from multiple vendors specialized in different categories like content, order management, search, e-commerce. And frankly, they could be 20 or 30 different ones. And that allows you to tailor your stack specifically to your needs without living with the trade-offs of choosing one platform to deliver it all, which is very important for large companies, because at a certain scale, when we're dealing with a certain volume, even the tiniest improvements that can increase your conversion rate, they can result in a huge gains, like really huge. Very often, these companies are willing to invest millions of dollars into like a year-long migration and complete rewrite to see a few percent of revenue uplift from coming like from a better conversion rate. So something that may sound stupid at first glance is actually very much rooted in Excel, and it's actually giving a good return of investment. And these things are often enabled by a completely new technology. For being completely honest, in most cases, these companies could probably squeeze much more from their existing technology without switching to something completely new, but that's a different topic. And one of the examples how you could squeeze more from your existing setup is like by improving performance. It has a huge impact on your revenue when you reach a certain scale. And by the way, there is a good study from Amazon. It's from 2006 that showed that every 100 milliseconds that they added to the page load costed the 1% in revenue. And for Amazon, this is insane money. It's really insane money. Okay, but that's a different topic about web performance. By the way, if you would like to learn a little bit more stats about how performance is improving the business metrics, because maybe you want to convince your boss to do this, there is a wonderful website called WPO-stats.com, which stands for Web Performance Optimization Stats.com. Okay, but let's get back to the composable architecture. I had to put something performance related because it is actually very much related to those tiny optimizations that those brands would like to do. And this is actually an important piece because we'll be building something quite similar. I will be showing the code of something quite similar but simplified. So Allokai is a platform or a framework which delivers multiple products that work with each other. It's a whole ecosystem. So we deliver ready-to-use storefront and storefront UI component library. The storefront UI component library is actually fully open source and free on MIT license. You can check it on GitHub. If you're building something related to e-commerce, you can use it. We also deliver something called unified data layer. And I think this is an interesting concept. It basically abstracts the underlying APIs and rewrites all the responses to a common format which we developed. And remember this part because we'll be getting back to this concept. We also have Allokai Connect, which is like a separate application where you connect all the APIs together. So it's kind of a powerful combination with unified data layer, and we'll be actually recreating something like this in Nuxt. And obviously, we also have cloud solution where you can host all of it without really worrying about the infrastructure, CI/CD, and this sort of stuff. And you will see in a moment that each of those pieces is actually critical in achieving our goal. And that's also something that makes this problem so hard to solve for many organizations, because it's not a single layer problem. It's about sharing and inheriting UI, business logic, data, and frankly much more, because it also has to be translated into infrastructure. Like picking from multiple vendors and making all of that work together is a Herculean task sometimes for large organizations. Luckily, Nuxt is actually really capable full stack framework that covers all of that, frankly, on its own. Maybe without infrastructure, but you could argue with Nuxt Hub right now. And also, please note that this solution I will be outlining in this talk is kind of based on pure Nuxt, so I won't be using Allokai at all, but we'll be recreating something very similar, covering more or less same challenges. So, our story in short, like we went up market in the last 2 years. We used to be called vStorefront, then we switched to Allokai. This is kind of representing also the change of the type of the customer that we're going after. And when we went up market, like those big companies, they started coming to us with more or less the same problem. The problem was their e-commerce stack became increasingly complex to manage and evolve, also ridiculously expensive. And to better understand like how things like that happen, and I think those things happen for any kind of company, not only e-commerce, let's see an example of a brand called Capybara Fashion with a beautiful logo that I created in ChatGPT. So Capybara Fashion was founded in UK. They are having a UK site, and they're doing very well. And they're doing so well, they are deciding to expand into US. So they're expanding into US. They're opening an office in there, and they're having a US site. So right now they're having 2 websites, 2 web stores, and they're doing so well, so damn well, because everyone loves capybaras, that at some point they're also doing exactly the same in Japan. So right now they have 3 offices, 3 e-commerces. Every time they want to ship any kind of update, they're having 3 code bases to do this. Obviously, every market is different. It is managed by different teams. There are different product catalogs, and maybe they're even differing slightly on some features, taxes, etc. They are kind of different in different companies, in different countries, but 95% of that is pretty much the same application, right? But the story doesn't end here, and this is especially true for the large companies. Capybara Fashion is such a hit. They're doing so well. People love it so much. Like you will see people wearing capybara stuff literally everywhere, that they're getting so rich, they're deciding to start buying their competitors. And there was one other company that was also a huge success, but not as much of a success as Capybara. It was called Butterfly Fashion. And they're doing so well that they're acquiring Butterfly Fashion. And Butterfly Fashion came through the same way. So right now they're actually having 6 applications. And the applications from Butterfly Fashion, they're running on a completely different e-commerce platform. So we could say that one is running on Shopify, and another one is running on Vendura. I'm not sure if you know Vendura. You probably should. I think they're having some talks around Vue.js community here and there. So, the customer comes to us like this Capybara Fashion and asks us for a plan on how we can make that simpler and how to best leverage the project we have in doing that, because this complexity is giving them a lot of headache. And they came with a list of very specific requirements. So first of all, they wanted to be able to use multiple backend integrations for the same code base. As I said, like one is Shopify, another is Vendura. Obviously, over time, they probably want to migrate to a composable architecture, but at the time being, they're just having 2 separate monolithic applications. Obviously, they wanted to be able to include some logic specific to each store and maybe each region, as each brand could have unique capabilities and unique features. They wanted to be able to deploy it and scale separately. And that's super important. It's not a multi-tenant architecture where we are having a single code base and a single instance of the application to serve multiple types of customers. Here we are having a single code base that is actually deployed into multiple applications. They wanted to be able to style each brand and store separately. Obviously, like Butterfly and Capybara have different designs and different brand identities. And last but not least, actually, this is the key requirement. They wanted to release as much code as possible because they were expecting some new acquisitions in the future. So they wanted a future-proof setup. So let's talk on the high level about the solution to understand it on the architectural standpoint, and then we'll dig into the actual code. First and foremost, the solution that I've chosen to fulfill most of the requirements listed here is inheritance based on files. And it is a great solution, really great solution, because it is universal. And if you've been reading my content quite old, I won't lie, on View School, you know that I'm a huge fan of high-level inheritance as a solution to problems related to theming or usability. It's not perfect and fits mostly into the cases where you need to extend only a small portion of the core application. So when there is a big common part, and frankly, it gets very, very hard to maintain when there is a lot of things you have to override. Then other solutions like maybe plugin architecture or things like that could probably work better. But for our use case, it fits perfectly, absolutely perfectly, and you will see why. We're going to have 3 directories, one with the base application and all shared functionalities, then one for each store when we put the files we want to override and like the functionality styles that we want to override, right? For example, this is how we'll be overriding the product component for the Capybara store. All works on the inheritance file mechanism, so we just need to put a file with a similar path in the directory related to a separate store. Now, another thing is styling. That's another requirement. And here is one caveat. I know that we have a lot of fans of Tailwind. Probably most of you are using Tailwind, and the rest probably hates Tailwind because that's what Tailwind does. It divides people. But I think Tailwind is amazing. I think it's like a gift from the productivity gods. I hate CSS, especially at scale. I really hate it. But for this particular use case, it's not a good fit here. Even though there are tons of use cases where Tailwind shines, to make the best use of the solution that we want to develop, we want to make sure that we are overriding only the parts that we need. And for that, we need to separate styles from the markup. This way, we can change the look and feel of elements without actually changing the structure and changing the markup, which could be problematic. So ideally, we would like to land on something like this, where we have a separate component with the markup and the styling, and then a separate CSS file with the markup and with the JavaScript piece, and then a completely separate file for the styles that can be then overridden individually. Last but not least, abstracting the API. So I already mentioned that the customer is using different e-commerce vendors for different brands. Like one is using Shopify, another one is using Vendura after the acquisition. And that's a problem because you could imagine that they're coming with different data models, and it's kind of a deal breaker for having the same UI for all of them. Like, how we can make that happen, right? So the way how we will make that happen, and it's also a quite common thing that I'm seeing, especially in the e-commerce applications, and as you saw, something that we are also shipping is data normalization. So you can imagine that like we have data like a product data, for example, coming from Shopify, or a product data coming from Vendura, and then we have a function, a place that is normalizing this data to a common format that is then consumable by the frontend. The reality is it is extremely convenient to do something like this because the frontend usually needs to consume only a small portion of data. And on the domain level, like frankly, all the e-commerces have almost the same thing. Sometimes they are differing slightly, sometimes they are differing more, but a lot of stuff can actually be normalized. So we are having this kind of function that is normalizing different APIs. It is also making your frontend extremely portable, because if in the future you would like to replace any of those, like you're not touching the frontend at all, which is a pretty nice benefit because this way we are avoiding the tight coupling. Okay, so that's enough about the solution on its own. Let's see how it looks. And for that, I will have to stop sharing my screen, and I will have to present a different one. By the way, you don't know that, but I actually had like a 3 years break from coding, and that's one of the first things that I came back with. It's gonna be fun. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so let's do a quick walkthrough through this application and see what is happening in there. By the way, at the very end, like I will just post a link to the repository so you can explore it on your own, see all the concepts in here, etc. I will probably also write something on Discord about that, where I will go a little bit deeper. But just from the high-level perspective, like we have our application, our simple Nuxt.js application. We have our entry point. In the entry point, we have a product component. Now, when we look at the components directory, it is empty. When we look at the server directory, it is pretty much empty. In the public, we have a standard out-of-the-box features like favicon. The magic happens here on the layers directory. And in Nuxt.js, we have a concept of Nuxt layers, and everything becomes Nuxt layer automatically when you put it into the layers directory. And the goal of Nuxt layers is pretty much to mimic the top level directory. So whatever you will put here is a layer, and layers are stacking on top of each other. So in the Nuxt config file, you are having an extends property where you could say that, okay, like we want this to be a layer. And if we put something on a different layer, we want this to overwrite the files from that layer. And you can stack it infinitely. You can use GitHub repositories. You can use NPM packages. So this is how we are deciding the order. So let's look at this base application. It's rather simple, actually. So first of all, like we are having a product.view component, which is basically what we see on the right side, and it is fetching the data from the API route called product. If we go to this API route, here I just have some mock data with Capybara, nothing special. I'm just returning this data. As you saw, I have a separated CSS file for this component. So again, if we look at this component, it's actually imported here. And one important caveat is that in Nuxt layers, when you're having a relative imports, they are actually related to this layer. So even if we override the product here, this won't automatically point to the CSS file. We'll have to either copy this or directly say that we are actually referencing to the base. So that's the first caveat. Second thing, we also have a file with global variables where we have only one variable. So if we only need to differ slightly, and it is quite common that those applications only need to differ slightly, it's probably a good idea to just extract the things that need to differentiate into CSS variables and have a single CSS file that will be overriding and just specifying those things. So that's something we would call like a global configuration. Now, as you can see in here, the accent color is green, and we are using the accent color for our product image, for our product page as a box shadow. So here it is green. Yet we are showing the Capybara brand where it is red. So how does it work exactly? Like, first of all, you probably noticed that we're using an environmental variable called deployed store. And this is pretty much how we are specifying which story right now we are deploying and which story we want to preview. So I'm specifying this to Capybara, which is pretty much telling me that I am using this directory, right? So we are having layer base, and the layer base is overridden by layers Capybara. And also the global styles are being pulled from the layers Capybara. And if I will look here at the Capybara, I love this animal, by the way. I see that the only thing that was overridden is actually a global CSS file where we have changes to brown. But also, if you look at the API routes, we see this normalization happening. So please note that the product.view component is not overridden here. We're using the old one because we just don't need to change anything in here. We only need to change the styling of the element, the global property, and we only need to change the data. And here we have this normalization, and maybe I will move it a little bit. So what we have here is we have a Vendure product coming, like just mocked, coming from the Vendure platform, mocked for simplicity, in a format that is not consumable by our product.view. Here we expect something that gives a product name, like price, product description, basically this type, normalized product. So what we are doing is that we are taking this Vendure product, we are creating a normalized product function that takes this as an input, returns normalized product as a return value. And this way, even if we're taking data from a different platform, it's being normalized, and still we can consume it in this component without any changes, which is pretty cool. Now, let's say we want to change that to the butterfly application. And in the butterfly application, we did exactly the same thing right now. So we have a global CSS where the accent color is blue. We have a Shopify data model, which is a little bit more complicated. We're also normalizing this. So when I go to env file and change to butterfly, and we are in dev, I should see the butterfly application. Amazing. Okay, but like we haven't, so that's pretty much how this works, but we still haven't covered one use case, which is, okay, what if we want some custom functionality? Well, this is when we're actually copying this component here. So we can do Command C, not here, here. We're going to product view, and let's say that what we want is a button buy now, right? So okay, so we're having a button buy now, we're saving it, and this is the problem that I mentioned, that the paths are not being resolved relatively to like any kind of top layer. They are being resolved relatively to the layer where it is. So it is looking for a product that CSS in the butterfly. It doesn't have it. So there are two things we can do. Like we can either do this, and that should make that work. And then I should probably reload the application. Yep. So we see the buy now button. Or if we would like to style this buy now button specifically for this layer, we can either do it here. Let's say I will do buy now background color. We'll use the accent color variable and color white. AI is giving a great ideas. Maybe a small padding. Maybe actually a little bit better padding. Maybe also adjusting border radius. Actually, AI is amazing with giving you ideas on how to do this. And here we are. Here we have a completely separate feature only visible in the butterfly application. And when we are getting back to Capybara, which I have to, I guess, restart, but let's see. Yeah. We don't have that button. Okay, so that would be pretty much it about this concept. If you would like to see the repo, let's get back to the presentation. you can find it under this link. And I know that example was quite simple, but I think it's actually great that it was simple, because the goal was to illustrate the problem and outline some possible solutions to different sub problems, especially like adding specific features, changing the styling, and also getting the data from multiple data sources. So if this is something that you will be facing in your company, maybe building applications for different touchpoints, maybe even working for e-commerce, uh, I think that's gonna be incredibly useful for you. And frankly, Nuxt.js is quite amazing because it is offering everything that we need to make that happen. We don't really need to reserve to any third-party tools. The Nuxt layers mechanism is pretty much amazing, and I'm very much encouraging everyone to just experiment with it a little bit. Thank you.
All right. We have so many questions. Let's get started. Can you share Pina stores between layers and app?
That's a good question. I haven't tried that, but my assumption is that yes, it will work exactly the same way as it used to with any other directory. And this is why layers are an inheritance in general is quite a powerful solution that is pretty much allowing you to do anything and have only one concept to learn to do all of those things. By the way, there was this article that I was linking. It was called Team Inheritance in Nuxt Applications. You can Google it, which is probably giving you some backdoor solution in case Nuxt layers won't work for this. But my assumption is that it will. I haven't tried it with Pina, but I don't see any reason for it to work in a different way than anything else.
All right. Is it possible to integrate internationalization with 18 layers and multi-app?
Yes, definitely. And if I would have more time, I would probably also show this. But again, it would work exactly the same way. You could have like one file with all the I18 files, all the translations, etc. Make multiple files for different geographies in the base application, and then maybe if you're having some additional things, you can either override it or have a special file that is actually empty, where you're only putting the overrides, so you don't need to override the big one in the layers.
And this one is somewhat simple. Can we use I18N?
Yes.
Cool. That was
Probably
easy.
yes.
Are layers only for components methods that cannot be modified scope-wise?
No, it's for all the directories that Nuxt is delivering. So you've seen like server APIs, but it will also work for pages, assets, literally anything in there. You could
Thank
just think
you.
about this
Oh,
as a mechanism of file inheritance. Like any directory you will put there will be just overwritten in the layer.
got it. Thank you. Can we share and extend stores?
Depending on what you mean by stores, I assume that you don't mean Pina stores, or maybe you do. But like if you mean stores like stores like Butterfly Store or Capybara Store that we had there, yes, we can share them. Like all of this can be pretty much packaged into either GitHub repository and pulled directly from the GitHub repository or npm package. So the extents directory that I was showing, it can very much accommodate any kind of source. It's either GitHub repo, it's an npm package, it's a relative path in your project, like whatever you put it, it can be a layer. And actually, it's a great feature to ship UI components library that actually has all the components easily overrideable. So, if you're building one, you should probably look for layers.
How does auto import work? Files may not be named the same, stores with different methods, app specific.
Yeah. So if they are named the same, then just the layer that is on top is taking precedence. So let's say, as we have seen, like if we have a method or a component called product in one layer, and then in the layer that is on top of this layer, in this extend utility, the auto import will work in a way that it will import the right one. It doesn't
Great,
work
thank
though
you.
with relative imports, as we have seen with the CSS.
Okay. And how can we build app layer wise? So app one, app two, etc.
I was showing this. So like it's pretty much you are specifying which app you want to build via the end variable and just building the project. As simple as that. So when you're having your deployment scripts and you want to deploy it, separate in a CI/CD, the only thing that you have to set is this environmental variable, because this is actually specifying the layer that you would like to consume, and the other one is ignored, and it is also tree shaken. The only thing that is not tree shaken, I mean, it is tree shaken, but the only thing that will be eagerly downloaded when we are installing dependencies are dependencies from other layers, because we have one package JSON, but they won't land in the final bundle, so it will only increase the time of fetching node modules in your CI/CD process.
Interesting. Thank you. Does that mean that all of the apps must be in the same monorepo to share layers and thus code?
No, they don't. Actually, I would encourage a lot. Like, if you're like, it really depends on how you're working with that. It's probably more a question of how the teams are being structured. Like, if there is one team working on all of that, it's probably most convenient to have a single repository, not even mono repository. Like, it can be a single repository. It also can be a mono repository if you're having different dependencies and then ship it as npm packages in the repo. But like, that would be my recommendation if you just have one team working on all of those projects. Maybe if we have separate teams that are consuming this, then it's probably a good idea to have it in a separate repo maintained by someone else, like released on a specific cadence, so you can track breaking changes, the sort of things. Kind of like a platform team managing that. But it really depends on the structure of the teams. There are no technical constraints around like how it should be structured, which is quite amazing, frankly.
Thank you. And last question, will the full contents of the base CSS file be replaced by the contents of the Capybara CSS file, or are the rules merged with only the common rules being replaced?
I wish it worked in the way that you described, like it is being replaced fully, but we can also be very creative with the structure of the files, frankly. So like if we are seeing that we have a huge file and maybe there is some subset of things that we'd like to override in the product component, maybe it is worth just extracting the subset of things into a separate CSS file and then overriding this. Like it's pretty much something that you can really adjust to your needs. Like you can create some sort of like a public API for modifications and things that maybe shouldn't be modified. Like if you're having a huge files and only a small portion of this file is being modified, and it's not only about CSS, it's also about the components themselves, it's probably worth extracting this into something smaller just for the simplicity.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Philip. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me again.
All right, y'all. We're almost to our last talk of the day, but first, let's find out more about the Nuxt certification. We have the Nuxt certification, which is up to 55% off with an extra $20 off because of this conference. Use Black Friday 24 and we'll go to certificates.dev/Nuxt and well, bam, we're here. So you can go ahead and enter your email, sign up with GitHub or Discord to get the certifications. These are companies that have used it, definitely suggest. And one thing that I'm looking forward to is getting this certification because I think it's something that, yes, it's for mid-level or senior developers, but no matter what, it's easy to show people just by a certification that you know your stuff. So make sure that you set this go sign up. And up next, we have Ben Hong. Ben is a member of the Vue core team and will share his thoughts on embracing local first apps with Nuxt. With his unique blend of skills as a developer, psychologist, and educator, you're in for a treat. Welcome to the stage, Ben. Hey Ben, you're on mute.
There we go.
Perfect.
Fantastic. All right. Hello, everybody. See, I knew something was up. All right. How's everybody doing today? Okay, so welcome. So for the final talk, I'll be talking about getting your head out of the cloud and embracing local first apps with Nuxt. So let's kick it off, shall we? So I always like to start talks with a little fun fact. So for me, I am a big fan of amusement parks, and this is one of my favorite rides, the Jurassic Park River Adventure from Universal Studios. And if you can't find me up here in the photo, you see I'm all the way up here in the upper right. I'm the guy with two hands up in the air because it's an 80-foot drop, pretty big one, but lots of fun. And so if you ever get a chance, be sure to check it out. But fun fact aside, so as Jen mentioned, so my name is Ben Hong. I'm a staff developer experience engineer. I love helping to make the web like a fun place to build things. So Vue core team, Nuxt ambassador, but I also do work with the Angular team too. I'm currently helping them with the docs, and just happy to be part of open source and the whole narrative around that. If you're looking for me on the Internet of Things, you can find me under the moniker Ben Code Zen. I think I own most of the properties on that. So whether you're looking for me on YouTube, Blue Sky, whatnot, you can find me under that. All right, so let's start by setting the stage, shall we? On the fact that we live in this incredible age right now where we have technology, computing devices, and we're connected to the internet, and it's phenomenal, right? It seems like everything is perfect. Now, all this to be said, this is what ultimately was the selling point of this concept of cloud computing, right? Because we have this ability to have all our devices connected to this magical cloud and our data, and it stores all our data, and we never have to worry about anything, right? Well, except when the cloud completely fails us. So whether that's traveling on a train that has spotty signal, or frankly, you're sitting at the coffee shop with weak Wi-Fi, or also known as Li-Fi. And it's really frustrating when the apps that we rely on for our critical infrastructure basically keeps us out of reach from our work. Say, I don't know, let's say, for example, you have a big presentation and you have all your notes in this app that only works when it's online, except, oh, sorry, the time you needed, the servers are offline. And so you've lost also some of your data before your big presentation. And, don't ask me how I know. Not that I haven't been there before. And no, I'm not bitter at all that software hasn't done that to me before. So, you end up in this position where you're just like, I don't know, I pay all this money to like keep my data safe and to have it ready to go. Yet for some reason, like, why does it feel like I don't have any control when it comes to this stuff? And so at the end of the day, though, there's this great little sticker that I absolutely love. And it's this reminder that there really is no cloud. It's really just someone else's computer, right? Because that was ultimately the selling point of cloud, was that you never had to worry about servers anymore, right? Someone else dealt with it. But that also meant you gave up the control of what was happening to your data and basically server uptime and all those things. And God forbid that the app that you're using that's part of your critical infrastructure is getting acquired, right, by, I don't know, a big company, say cough cough Huli or whatnot. And then hooray to all the employees who made a lot of money, but kind of a sad day for users, because typically, as we well know, acquisitions usually mean the services are getting shut down or they're getting integrated, which means users are sort of left to fend for themselves as far as painful migrations, or as most of us have experience with note-taking apps and other things like that before, we essentially declare tooling bankruptcy and we just start over. And I think that's a pretty sad place for us to be sort of in this modern world of tech. And so, to paraphrase the words of the great Obi-Wan Kenobi, there was this whole concept with cloud computing, especially when it was introduced, and everyone was so excited that it was supposed to be the chosen one, right? It was said that it would unite all the apps and not divide them. Yet, more and more as we see apps that are so cloud-centric around their data model, around subscriptions, I think people have a fatigue regarding all these subscriptions and their data being split up in multiple places and then having to deal with proprietary data formats. It's exhausting. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, as a user, it feels like we don't have any control. And then, so in case people can't see the meme up top, there's the keyboard and the control key is missing. So that's what's up there. Now, of course, fear not, though. This is not a talk to sit here and talk about all the ways that clouds has failed me. No, I'm not bitter. We are here to talk about local first, right? That there is actually an answer to some of these frustrations that I'm sure many of us have dealt with when it comes to working with cloud. All right, so let's start by setting the tone, shall we? What exactly is local first? Basically, so this is a definition from a very popular blog post by Ink and Switch. And so it reads, basically local first software includes the ability to work offline and collaborate across multiple devices while also improving the security, privacy, long-term preservation, and user control of data. Now that is a mouthful, right? So I want to focus on two specific things. In that local first software is about the ability to work offline, and two, the ability to collaborate across multiple devices. And so a lot of times when people hear local first, the reason I want to clarify this is because they think that it means local only, meaning that we're only talking about storing data locally and then you don't have the ability for multiplayer and that kind of stuff. Local first is essentially a move towards a more hybrid approach where we do want to take the benefits of cloud, right? It's not that cloud doesn't have its advantages, but the idea that we've sort of given up so much control, especially on the data front, to the cloud when we have these incredibly powerful devices that we often pay lots of money for in terms of storage and hard drive, why we can't find a bridge between those two and find a sort of a happy medium. So for those who have been in the tech industry a bit, as we well know, what's old becomes new again. And so let's take a little trip down memory lane. And for those who don't have much memory with this, to explain here, here we have a Microsoft Office Home and Student 2007 license, a box basically that you purchased for like, say, I think it was like $200-300. But the great thing was you got all these CDs with the license key, and as long as you popped it in, installed it, that worked. You owned it. Same thing for Adobe Photoshop, right? You paid a one-time license fee, and then as long as you were okay with the fact that you were on CS 6.0, you were good to go. And gosh, let's not forget a throwback to the N64 days of Super Smash Bros. Here we have a cartridge. You bought the game for $40. You plug it in. It works. It's fantastic. We've kind of lost sight of that, right, for a lot of our software these days, because for a lot of, especially these cloud-centric services, internet is not optional. But local first is wanting to push that, right? Because, I mean, let's take, for example, any gamers here, if you know, we are dealing with a sort of controversial thing regarding who owns the games that we purchase, especially when it comes to digital licenses. And so now when you purchase games, you have to download tons of gigs of data. And then on top of that, if the server happens to be offline, good luck with playing the game that you want to play, let alone if they have some sort of weird thing where they've expired your license. Like, there's no ownership anymore. What happened to that sort of feeling? And then on top of that, right, with all the subscription models and the payment, it makes things incredibly complicated for users because a lot of times, most people, especially with things like, with Adobe Photoshop, that kind of stuff, most of the people just have very basic needs, and paying the one-time $200-300 fee to have a perpetual license makes a lot more sense to them than some subscription fee, which, don't get me wrong, makes a lot of sense for professionals who want to be up to date with the latest and greatest. But if you have a machine that can run the software that solves your problem, shouldn't that be good enough? And so, yeah, to harken back, like, this is what made this era of software so great, was that this is what you got when you purchased it, and you got to keep it and reuse it across devices as you saw fit. And so local first then also purport this idea that apps work forever, because in the instances we talked about earlier regarding software, where you're essentially cloud-centric dependent and you don't own the data, the moment the apps go away, like, you're basically out of luck, or if the apps shut down and whatnot. So we want to move back to that point where we can own the software truly as users. And then here is a little riff on the Halloween candy meme. If you hadn't seen, it reads, parents, please check your kids' Halloween candy. There have been reports of random AI features that no one has ever asked for. And so, a lot of times, in terms of what we're talking about here, a lot of times with this software, we have now this issue where we have trusted so many companies with our data in the cloud. And now, because, well, let's face it, no one ever reads the terms of agreements whenever we're clicking that thing. Like, a lot of our data is being opted into training models and that kind of stuff that, honestly, if we had known from the beginning, might have actually opted out of. And so, without naming any platforms, like, a lot of them even have the point where you're automatically opted into the training of language models, and you actually have to explicitly opt out, rather than what you would think would be the more, let's call it the ethical way, which is you opt into the model training. And so a little throwback to the Microsoft Office days, for those who remember, that's Clippy, the Office assistant. And so it's a little joke on, it sounds like you're trying to reconsider my legacy. Would you like some help? and sort of harkening back to how chatbots now are kind of being injected on sort of every product that we see these days. Okay, so this brings us to a couple of other things why local first is becoming more and more important as a software trend. In that when you have data that's local first and for your users to own and keep on their devices, then you get security and privacy by default. Because this means that it will work offline, basically on the device without needing an internet connection. And more importantly, at the end of the day, with all of this in mind, your user gets to retain ultimate control. And that, I think, is really powerful when we think about how software impacts local communities. And the fact that a lot of the software we talk about these days are designed around enterprise companies, which is nothing wrong with it. But there's a kind of a forgotten market, I think, with the indie hackers and helping to solve problems that communities are having that might not justify the large scale that like a lot of enterprise solutions often ask for. And so local first is this really great movement, and one of the reasons why I'm here talking to you about it today. Now, of course, if you're wondering for some examples of great apps that are doing this local first example, I'm a huge fan of Obsidian. It's a markdown note-taking app. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I will nerd out about Obsidian with you all day long. And so highly recommend checking that out. Basically, it keeps all your markdown files locally on your computer in your hard drive, and that's what they are. They're just text files. They're not proprietary data formats, and it lets you modify and do fun stuff and automate. And it's a phenomenal piece of tooling. And the great thing about Obsidian is that once you download it and it works with your notes, you don't ever have to download and update again. It just works. And so shout out to them on that. And Linear, for those who don't know, is a sort of like a project management issue tracking app. And they have a similar principle as well, where everything works offline, and then it will sync to like GitHub or whatever project issue tracking software you're using. But both of these are sort of like proponents of and like solid examples of this concept of local first. Now, of course, all this said and done, now we've done a little bit primer on local first and its benefits. The real question here is obviously, how do I build for local first? And if you're jumping into this, there's actually quite a few libraries and stuff. Can be a little bit overwhelming. And so here we have a bunch of different logos from Dexy.js on the upper left to like YJS, CouchDB. We got a lot going on here. And so it can be a bit to filter through, but we're here at Nuxt Nation. So of course, the really big question is, how do we do this with Nuxt? And that's what we'll be talking about. And so we're going to cherry pick a couple of these technologies today. And we're going to talk about Nuxt with Dexy.js, which is basically a thin wrapper, a minimalist wrapper around IndexedDB. And then RxDB, which basically helps to provide the syncing and caching that will make the experience of working with a backend feel pretty intuitive and, more importantly, show some pretty cool stuff. All right. So with that, for those wondering, everything that I'm showing today will be is already up on GitHub. So it's under my moniker bencodezen/localfirstnuxt to do MVC. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at some code, shall we? Okay. First thing first, let's walk through the code. All right, so here's a demo of the app that you have here. Basically, as you can see here right now, it's deployed the app at netlify.com, and we have this little hash here that is important, and we'll get back to you in just a bit. So we have here a really standard to do MVC, and you're probably thinking, what's so interesting about this, right? We got the ability to clear. We can go ahead and shift between the different filters. This is great. And so what's interesting, though, about this is that we are now entering sort of a realm where, one, all of the data is offline. So as you can see, if I go ahead and work on this and I say, let's get ramen for lunch, right? That's added. And if I refresh, because it's using IndexedDB at the bottom, don't worry, we'll look at code later. Everything is basically, the session is stationary. It's been saved. But what's particularly cool, though, is that this app also uses peer-to-peer technology in order to allow for sessions. So if we go ahead and I have this open now in Safari here on the right here, you'll see here that right now we have both apps open, and then I say, never mind, I'd like to get burgers. You see that both sides populate at the same time. And what's really cool about this is using WebRTC and peer-to-peer basically communication in order to send data, basically having this sort of multiplayer impact. But here's the cool part about this. There's no middle person. There's no server in between. And what's cool about this is if we take this offline, this app will still work on its own and it'll still do its thing. And so, so if you want to play around with this, you can go ahead and go to this URL right now. Again, the hashtag for now, we're going to use room-nuxt-nation-2024. Because this is being recorded, I'm going to go ahead and close these particular URLs because I'm sure we have a couple of pranksters inside of the audience. And for the sake of ensuring we keep this PG for the kids, in case anyone's watching, I'm going to close these. But you can all see then. You can go ahead and play around and click around, and it should basically work. Okay, so that being said, we're going to go ahead and take a look at what's happening underneath the hood. So let me go ahead and now switch over to localhost 3000, and then boom, there we go. We have the local instance up and running. Let me put that over to the side. Let's bring this over 2/3. And so what we have here is a standard Nuxt 3 app. Nothing complicated. The main thing here, though, that makes this different from the apps is that we're utilizing basically the RxDB database as a composable. But then otherwise, what we're going through, you can see here that we have a very standard sort of NoSQL-like query where you're going through the database, you're getting the retrieved, and then basically once you get that response, you're just assigning it to a reactive value like we typically would. As you can see here, to-do list is a ref. And then inside of here, everything else is really standard view Nuxt. And so let's go ahead and dive into what makes this a bit different. And so inside of our used database, composable, you'll see here that we had a lot of different imports coming in, but so we'll skip on down inside of here to kind of explain what's going on. So we have essentially your singleton pattern that has a database promise, which allows us to basically call on the same database so that you don't instantiate multiple ones, especially when you're going through different components, you might need to call different database functionality. And so that's why this, you can see here, this is being instantiated out here. And then we have the use database composable, which is going inside and then basically going through all the motions as far as like initializing a database of IndexedDB storage with Dexy.js. And then there's a bunch of things going on here. But one of the things that's really cool here is that we can see here, this is the part of the code that's showing you how the room ID hash is working in terms of like it's generating it, populating it inside the URL. And then this is what's allowing us to essentially create unique database instances that allow us to basically see different instances. So for example, if we take a look at here, right now we have, let me just make this easier. This is room 123, and 123 will have some numbers inside of here, 456, 789. This is great. And then here, if I switch the hash again to, let's say, 456, you'll see here that it's basically gone, right? It's essentially a new instance of the app. And we go back to 123. And then, oh, it looks like this one, of course, live demos. But anyways, so it typically saves the cache of the individual database instances. Okay, so I'll debug that another time. But, okay. And then finally, one of the things when it comes to local first that most people don't realize is that one of the core technologies that's basically being worked on as an industry is around this idea of sync engines, because what we have to do is figure out how we actually coordinate the UI changes that you're making on the front end with the back end in a way that doesn't basically override each other with conflicts. Because if anyone has ever tried to write one of these before, you'll know that especially when it comes to multiplayer aspects, it's easy to think that when player 1 makes a change and then player 2 makes a change, all you need to compare is the last modified date. But it's more complicated than that because a lot of times within your backend service, as things are being updated and saved, these are being run in parallel to the various actions that users are taking. So you really need a way to sequentialize it in a way that ensures that you have a serialization of the data that makes sense rather than having sort of these race conditions where updates are being happened and then are happening on the back end that don't make sense and don't correspond to the front end. And so as you can see here, again, we won't dive into the nitty gritty as far as like defining schemas and stuff. But the key here to try to illustrate here is that what Local First is trying to do is make it a lot easier, especially as web developers, for us to build a lot of the front end piece of it. And then it takes care of that magic when it comes to all the rest of it. Because some of the things that sync engines also do, for example, is that you can imagine that if you want all your data to run locally first, that can be really expensive if you're downloading all of your data all at once, especially if you're dealing with gigs and gigs of, let's say, notes and images and that kind of stuff. And you have all these reference points. But then also, the issue here is that what happens when you want to deal with performance issues regarding like things that are recently done. And so the sync engine is basically responsible for not only ensuring that basically recent data is being kept up to date, but then also strategies regarding how to best optimize for those performance edge cases regarding like how much of the cache to save versus what's being recently accessed. And all that logic is being taken care of by sync engines such as, so in this case, we're using RxDB. But another one that I want to shout out to is Replicache. And they're doing some incredible work regarding helping to essentially create these sort of zero latency UIs that make it feel like, again, it's seamless, like your front end works with the back end exactly as you want. And it's dealing with all that sync stuff that you don't even have to think about. And as a result, your users just get this phenomenal user experience where it feels like your app is so snappy and the data is somehow saving to the back end. But guess what? All that's being done with this movement of local first. And so for those who really want to be on the cutting edge, Zero Sync Dev is the one I am personally really excited for. And this is essentially the evolution of Replicache. And they're basically, as you can see here, let me bump this up a bit so it's easier to see. Their idea here is that you can take your web app, and then with some SQL queries, it will automatically manage all like the WebSockets to zero cache, and then to replication across whatever clusters of database you're using. And then it just works. And then we get to do all the fun stuff regarding building the UI and creating really complex interactions, rather than having to worry about the sort of constant management of like API calls and then what do we do with the cache data and stuff. Like these problems are for the most part universal and I think should be solved at a way that is abstracted at this level. And so sync engines like this, I think, are a really big thing. And so it's funny because when I'd be on panels in the past, people would always ask like, what do you think is the next big thing when it comes to web development? Like at this point, my big thing, like if I'm betting anything on trends, it is local first, because there's just such an exciting premise regarding this idea that like we're moving further along this idea of giving users back the control of their data, but more importantly, making developers' lives way more fun as far as like being able to build these bespoke software solutions that might only make sense for a small amount of their community, but they don't have to spin up like a huge cluster of enterprise services just to make that happen, right? So anyways, that said, yes, okay, so we talked about that. Oh, yes, a couple other things. When you're walking through this in the future, if you look, you'll notice here that there is a process polyfill here, which looks kind of random, but this is part of the WebRTC plugin that's being used for RxDB. So that's what this is. I should probably add a comment in there so people can see, but this is not completely random, and must exist for things to work as is at the moment. Okay, so that said, all right, let's jump back into some slides. All right, so the final tech stack for what you saw here with the Nuxt to do MVC is essentially Nuxt 3. We have Dexy.js once again for IndexedDB, RxDB, which is essentially doing all the syncing regarding the database with making sure everything's talking to each other. And then the final piece of it is the WebRTC, which you can take a look at as far as how that works. And that's what allows what we saw regarding the peer-to-peer connection for data and sharing that. Okay, so with that said, as far as some of the closing thoughts that I want to go over, the thing is that if we try to imagine a future without this sort of local first trend towards software, might look something like this. And in fact, for those in case you can't see the slides, we have, I think it's Spamly from Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet. So he has an ad, want to get rich playing video games. And we got, the usual like and subscribe that we're all very familiar with on YouTube. And with a lot of these enterprise and especially software that is geared towards monetization in a way where virality and that kind of stuff is the name of the game, I think we lose out on a lot of what makes software so much fun to build for. Because oftentimes, again, I've hearkened to this a few times during this talk, but like one of the best things about, I think, in the early days before all of this, like sort of the monetary incentives came into play, was that software was really a way to automate things that helped our communities solve problems. And local first really is about that movement back towards that. And so, again, so to this point, like it is about giving users ownership over both their data and their tooling once again, and really does incentivize developers to build in this way, because not only is this a good user experience, honestly, as a whole for enterprise users as well, because there's nothing more frustrating than hearing like a user complain that because they didn't have internet, they couldn't use your software. But the fact that, right, okay. The fact that we're able to let users actually use the device that, again, that they purchase, right? You know, when we look at the hardware upgrades that we purchase on laptops, on phones for more storage, like we should be storing our data. That's the whole purpose of it. And for us to have ownership of that, that would, what a world to be, what a world it would be if we could return back to that and make progress towards that. So of course, again, this talk is really just a primer as far as local first. There's so much to go into regarding this. And again, if we had like a half a day of workshop, we would dive into all the nitty gritty. But I wanted to leave you with some resources regarding ways you can sort of get involved with the local first movement. And so the first of which is local first software. You own your data in spite of the cloud. This is probably one of the seminal blog posts that came out back in 2019. If you want to take a look at some of their findings regarding local first prototypes and some of the challenges that they encountered and how they solved it. And then there was also, I believe, the very first local first conference. And so this talk by Martin Kleppmann, the past, present, and future of local first, is a phenomenal primer on, as exactly as that sounds, the history and kind of where local first is going as an industry. And then one of my favorite talks of the year is by Maggie Appleton, and it's from the same conference, but it's about home cooked software and barefoot programmers. If you're feeling a little burnt out, or you're looking for inspiration of like what got you into this, industry, as far as, the fun and joy of coding, Maggie does a wonderful job sort of illustrating this concept and what this really means, especially in the age of AI, LLMs. Like, what does this mean for this concept of barefoot programmers, which I'd love to get into. But again, if you have time for any talk, highly recommend checking hers out. She's phenomenal. And then finally, if you're looking for a community to join, of course, there's the localfirstweb.dev, and then they have a Discord community and they have a meetup, I believe. So, check them out if you're looking for like-minded individuals who want to push this movement forward. And finally, as far as shipping stuff to users, I do want to give a shout out, because again, there's only so many things we can talk about in this time's talk slot. But Nuxt also works really well with Electron, and a big shout out to Tori. They just had their 2.0 release, I believe, a month ago. I think it's been at this point. So that is a phenomenal partnership as well. If you want to check out, that's a Rust-based, basically a desktop mobile app packager. You can use Nuxt View to build your app, and then these libraries will basically help you package it and ship them out. And so definitely check them out if that's something you've been itching to do. And so I guess as the final send off, this is a reminder that you have the power, right? Like, we as developers, a lot of times, I know that we don't have the ability to influence a lot of decisions at the leadership level regarding what they're choosing. But I think if more of us can push local first inside of our companies and this concept, I think we're going to see a much better user experience happening across the board for software as an industry. So yeah, I think with that, I know we were running over this
We have
talk,
questions.
so hopefully, thanks everyone for listening. And again, you can find me on the moniker Ben Coden. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. We have questions.
Yay, questions. Let's do it.
All right. Is use database a composable that can be used with any kind of database?
Yeah. So the use database I did was just a generic one, and so yeah. So basically, the answer is yes. You can configure whatever you want to it. It's just returning the database instance, and it doesn't have to be RxDB.
Cool. Is there any way to write a Nuxt sync engine that would deal with live sync with a database like Supabase and leverage their real-time API?
It's funny you should ask that. I definitely thought about that. I think my original approach when I was going with this talk was trying to do like a whole bespoke Nitro plugin to like make all of that work. But I think I mentioned this in my talk, but one of the challenges with sync engines is that you're almost making a product in and of itself besides the database and the front end, because there are a lot of decisions to be made regarding how caching is purged or saved, because caching is normally typically something you purge. But in something like a local first software, a lot of times cache actually stays around pretty permanently. So then you have to figure out a strategy for managing that. But is it possible? Absolutely it is. And so that's why I recommend, if that's something you're interested in, definitely start looking into like the local first community seems to be very open about the challenges that they've been encountering and solving. So be sure to check out those resources to kind of see what architectural challenges and performance bottlenecks they've dealt with that if you'd like to build it. And yeah, happy to look into it if you do build it.
Yay. All right. Are these features fully compatible with changing deployment target platforms like using Electron?
Yeah, that's what's actually one of the most exciting things I think about local first, the movement, is that they're not looking to append the entire software industry as far as how we build things. In fact, I think whoever came up with the word sync engine, I absolutely love. It's this piece that you just kind of drop in the middle between your front end and the back end, and it just does the magic for you. And so, like I said, you can look at the code on GitHub earlier, but again, very little of that was customized. It was just I told RxDB like, hey, I want to save my data to this, and then use the the peer-to-peer WebRTC extension. And then it just worked. Like I focused primarily on making sure the front end was wired up correctly. Like that's what makes, I think, local first really fun. And I think will make even easier for developers going forward. So it's super exciting.
Fantastic. Thank you. And more RxDB questions. What role did RxDB play in this demo? Is there any data being stored on their cloud, or is it all data being stored in our browsers and they simply serve as a connection sync pipeline between them?
Good question. So it's essentially the second one where there is no RxDB cloud. It's just responsible for basically, so the data storage is the Dexy.js that I was mentioning. It's actually using your browser storage IndexedDB to store all the data, and RxDB is responsible for the real-time sync regarding the IndexedDB sessions, and then in combination with the WebRTC plugin that we have, making sure those are talking to each other and working correctly. And so again, to the person who came up with Sync Engine, just perfect name. That's essentially all RxDB is doing.
Okay. When data is synced across devices, do all devices then store the latest copy of the data, or is it a merged data set?
Great question. So this is actually another one of the challenges that Local First has, is that when you have a user go offline for a long time, what do you do, right? And they made all these changes. And so basically it's the second where it's a merged data set, and sync engines are designed to also basically have intelligent decision points regarding when to choose things and not merely just the last modified point. Because just for a little bit of nerding out, the issue with the last modified comparison point is that if you as a user modify the data and then it goes to the server and the server makes a modification of that data and then it pushes that data back to your server to say that it made a modification, then your server then says that, oh, I made it, like there's a new update, and this is basically this infinite loop. And so because of that, sync engines help to take away that the business logic that ends up dealing with the merge conflicts, and it makes it a lot easier. So hopefully that
Nice.
helps answer the
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah.
All right. What are the limitations for the local first? Because as far as I know, there are some limitations on browsers for storage, etc.
Yeah, so I think the main limitation for local first at this point will most likely be, in my mind, performance. So for example, Obsidian, so it's not storing your text files on an IndexedDB. It's actually reading your local file system and reading like individual markdown files, and then it's intelligently caching. Like it's phenomenal what the Obsidian team has done. If you ever get a chance to try it and check it out. But basically, we're trying to figure out, or the local first community, to be honest, is trying to figure out ways to handle large data sets. And how to basically merge those things. And so that's really where I think it's fun, because if you ever wanted to be on the forefront of like a trend, I think this is the one to hop on, and there's a lot of room for having impact as far as how things go moving forward.
Nice. And last question. Is there a good spot to access local first community resources you mentioned near the end?
Oh, that's a great point. I'll make sure to go ahead and like on the social media share all my slides. But then I'll make sure also in that GitHub repository that in the README, I'll drop all those resources as well.
And
So,
those
yeah.
are how to reach out to them.
Yes, exactly. All the Ben codes and things. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today.
yeah, thanks everyone for having me.
All right, y'all. Ben wrapped up our conference. We are done with Nuxt